All right, welcome back to the PCC podcast. And in today's episode, we are going to be healing your relationship with tracking macros. And oh, this is such a good topic. And I did a training on this topic with our clients, our one on one clients, the other day. And number one, I was pissed because there was no recording. Normally, I have a recorder in every meeting. And that was the one day that my recorder decided to not follow me in. So the gold of that was not saved for the record, but I'm going to do my best to replicate it today for you all for free because I think this is a really critical piece of someone's journey being successful. And the reality is I hear this all the time is I hate tracking my food. It's so triggering. It's so time consuming. I wish that there was another way to go about seeing results. And I have personally had quite a large swing in terms of how I coach for clients with tracking or without. So when I first started coaching in 2016, 10 years ago, all I knew was tracking macros. That was my personal anecdote. So I didn't really have much else to go on. So that was what I taught. And for probably the first 3, 4, maybe even 5 years of my coaching experience, tracking macros was pretty much a requirement. You had to track, you had to have MyFitnessPal, you had to have a food scale. And I think that there was value to that season, to that style of coaching. However, there was a youthful ignorance that I had that because I didn't know any other option, I didn't have as well-rounded of a perspective on what tracking is for and what it's not for, situations to use it and when to not use it. And so I did have plenty of clients in probably the past 5 years compared to the first 5 years of coaching that would come back to me when they saw that, my message had changed. I had brought in more tools and strategies and basically like been like, okay, I need to heal my relationship with food because tracking kind of effed me up. And I was like, I know, I'm sorry, but we're going to fix it. So we did. And for a lot of those people, I was able to use tools that are mindful eating based, intuitive eating based, non-data driven approaches, and was able to teach people about nutrition that way. However, in the past year or two, what I've noticed is that the trend consistently is that the people that I allow to not touch numbers at all do generally stay stuck unless they are someone who has such a significant amount of weight to lose that even the smallest changes make a dent. When it comes down to it, there is value in data. And so now I feel like I've gone from one side of the pendulum to the other and back to where I can really look at the bigger picture and say, okay, tracking is valuable. Having data is so valuable, especially when you are trying to take the path of least resistance with your body and not run it into the ground, not feel like you're guessing, and feel empowered in the process. And that's not sexy to market because most people just want to have this feel as easy and simple as possible with as little legwork or thought as possible. And tracking your food has one of the larger learning curves compared to other dieting techniques or methods. Okay. And so, what we're going to cover today is the fact that my opinion has shifted. I'm much more middle ground. But I think for most of the people that I work with, most of the people that I talk to, tracking is not the issue. Tracking macros is a neutral tool that is data driven and has nothing inherently malicious about it. It doesn't have a personality, it doesn't have a vendetta. It is a tool. And a tool in the hands of the wrong user or the wrong mindset of the user can go south very quickly, right? So tracking macros is not toxic, but your relationship to data might be. And so if you've ever quit tracking your food because you've felt obsessive or anxious or just exhausted from the legwork, I'm not here to tell you to just push through it. I'm here to tell you that tracking was probably never the problem. And once you understand what was, everything actually gets easier. So we're going to walk through, basically I have the slide deck up here that I was using with my clients, and I'm just going to walk through that. And so the first slide says, welcome to the intervention, JK. But this is about using the tool differently, not just sucking it up. And so in order for us to understand how to use it right, we have to understand where it's going wrong, right? So the two most common ways that tracking goes wrong is avoidance, meaning I don't want to see the number, so I just won't look, whether that's the scale or the food or both. And then second is perfectionism. If I can't do it perfectly, then there's no point. And both of these are protection mechanisms, not character flaws. And both of them, the crappy part about it is that both of them can either be virtuous or vicious cycles. A virtuous cycle is when you do the thing, you face the demon, you take the step, and it creates a positive outcome, which creates momentum and motivation. And then you take more of that action and that snowballs, right? We've all been a part of a virtuous cycle in some way in the past. A vicious cycle is when we avoid the numbers and that actually makes things worse, right? And so the reality is the more we fault to avoidance, perfectionism, the worse our relationship with tracking gets over time because there's a lot of confirmation bias that goes into it. So let me explain how this works. So number one is avoidance. So how it starts is we make a decision that isn't so in alignment with our goals. Maybe we overate, or we feel guilty about a decision with food, or the week didn't go the way that we planned, or progress feels stuck. And so what feels safer in that moment is we don't log the food, or we don't step on the scale, and we don't look because we're a little afraid of what that might say, right? Totally natural. But what happens here is your brain doesn't like blank spaces. Your brain will fill in the blanks whether you like it or not, whether you realize it or not. We can't control that. It's just what our brain does. And our brain tends to fill the blank with the worst possible version. It tends to catastrophize. And so it starts to make this number out to be terrible of like, oh my gosh, what if the thing that I overate was like 1,000 calories too many? Or what if the scale was up 5 pounds today? Right. And so here's the ironic thing is that the longer we don't look, the bigger it gets in our head, right? Fear and avoiding something out of fear only makes the fear bigger and stronger, right? It's only when you face the fear that you realize it was never actually as big as you thought it was to begin with. And so maybe days pass, maybe weeks, and we wait for like enough motivation or just getting sick enough of our own excuses. And we give ourselves a clean slate. We start over Monday and when we feel ready. The cruel irony of this is in the gap where we're missing all the data, right? We're not tracking our food. We're just kind of eyeballing. We're not even weighing in. We have no feedback to know if we're in the right ballpark or not. And there's lots of research to show that when we're not tracking our food accurately, we are drastically underestimating our intake, which means we're likely out of our deficit the whole time. So when you finally do step on the scale, it confirms what you feared, not because you were actually right, but because the avoidance created the outcome. And so the truth is that the number that you're afraid to see is almost always smaller than the one that your brain invents if you face it right away. And that's the hardest part. Okay, next is the perfectionism trap. So perfectionists don't avoid tracking because they don't care. They care too much. And the standard that they've set is impossible to maintain. So it sounds like I have to weigh everything to the gram or it doesn't count. If I go over my macros, then the scale's not going to move. If I can't do it perfectly today, then I'll have to start over fresh tomorrow. If I didn't log that one thing, then the whole day is ruined. Or if it can't be accurate, what's the point? And what's actually happening underneath is that the perfectionist is using tracking as a tool that is a pass-fail test rather than an information gathering tool. And every log is a verdict. Every number that's off is evidence that they're failing. And so the brain does what it always does when there's impossible standards. It tries to avoid the test entirely. And we fall back into the avoidance thing, right? Because failing for a perfectionist is like a slap in the face, is a huge no, right? But the reality is that imperfect tracking does not equal no results. Going over one day does not mean the week is wasted, and not weighing to the gram does not mean that the data is useless. Okay. And so really, I think the biggest thing here that we need to acknowledge is that the data isn't actually the problem. The numbers, the weight on the scale, the numbers that we track with our food aren't actually the problem. And what I want you guys to think about is if you're a perfectionist, you're a high achiever, you probably were the person that strived for straight A's, extracurriculars, good behavior. And if you think about in school, the person who got straight A's versus the person who got D's and C's most likely had very different social standings, levels of praise versus punishment from teachers, from parents, and that kind of stuff gets internalized from a very young age, especially for high performers. And listen, you've probably been to plenty of therapy about this, right? Trying to remove your worth from outcomes and things like that. But tracking is one area that we don't realize that we're still doing that. And so the numbers aren't the problem. The meaning that you've attached to the number is. So the question I want you guys to start thinking about is, what do I make tracking or the numbers mean about me? And that's what we're actually healing. And funny enough, I was talking to the clients that we presented this to originally. And I was saying how, like, a lot of times people who have the easiest time with tracking are working in like science, data, or engineering because they understand that data is neutral and it's a tool. And maybe they spent years in college or grad school on learning that. And then I had two engineers that were on the call be like, I don't know, I'm still like kind of tied up in this. And I will rephrase that now that I've thought about it. Engineers have the easiest time doing the tracking, understanding the numbers, understanding trends, understanding line of best fit, understanding trend lines and consistency and data pools and things like that. But that doesn't mean that they've separated their identity or their self-worth from the numbers in this regard. So this is the biggest question that we have to really work on. And so the tool is neutral. What you bring to the tool is where the work is. This is where we go so much deeper with our clients, and like 99% of coaching companies out there is, yes, like, are we going to slowly work you towards tracking your food? Most likely, yes. However, are we going to just continue to say, just do it, just do it, just do it? You just got to do it. You just got to do it. No, we're going to go a layer deeper to figure out, right? The obsession, the hypervigilance, the good and bad, the morality, it didn't come from the tracking. It came from what we believed that the data meant about us and our worth. And that's what we're going to rewire and unwire to actually create a healthier relationship with the data so you can use it as feedback. Okay. And so here's one of the biggest reframes that we need to remember as most likely perfectionists, most likely people who want to do this right. And it's like, okay, I understand it doesn't need to be perfect, but like, how unperfect can it be before it stops being helpful, right? And so most women are trying to be accurate. They're trying to log every single gram, hit every single macro perfectly. And when they can't, they quit entirely. But accuracy is not actually the goal. What is reliability. A reliable estimate done consistently will beat a perfect log done 3 times per week every single time. And so, what I want you guys to understand, if we think back to if you ever took statistics, accuracy is how close did I get to the bullseye? If I'm throwing a dart, did I get close to the bullseye? The accuracy is how close you got there. The reliability is when I throw 10 darts, do they all kind of group in the same place? And if they all group in the same place, that's reliability, even if it's off center. And so what happens here is when we are reliable, even if we are off, then we are able to measure and see change over time. So I'll use a example of myself where things that I personally don't track. So every single day I make a coffee, whether it's decaf or regular, I make a coffee. And every single day I have a big can of whipped cream, and it's not the fat-free whipped cream anymore. I just got tired of buying it. Regular, full fat whipped cream. And I shake it up and I do takes about that long, like 2 seconds. Probably more calories than you would think, right? Maybe 50 calories or something like that. And then I give a little bit to my dog because he loves whipped cream. Every single day he knows when it's coming. And I don't track it. I haven't tracked it in years because I have it every single day, once a day, no more than once a day. And that's that. And so if I were to have a calorie cut from 1,600 to 1,500 calories, the accuracy might be off. Maybe I'm actually eating 1,650 calories and I'm at a plateau. But when we make the change, we're still reducing 100 calories, right? And so that's reliability. The thing that actually moves the needle over time is a reliable estimate repeated consistently. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I went into a lot of depth with my clients about how you can never be perfectly accurate, and the futility of trying to achieve perfect tracking, the futility of trying to weigh everything to the gram, because even if you do that, you could still be off. For example, I'll give you 2 examples here, but just know there were about 4 more examples that I went into with our clients that blew their minds. Is number 1, calories in, like what you track, what you log, versus calories absorbed. So absorbed meaning what is actually absorbed by the body. So calories that you absorb from lean protein sources compared to a Pop-Tart are very different, because protein has a higher what's called thermic effect of food, meaning you burn calories in the process of digesting those food. And for protein sources, particularly lean animal-based protein sources, the thermic effect of food can be up to 30 to 40%. So you could be burning off 30 to 40% of the calories. How many exactly, you'll never know, in the process of digesting that protein source, compared to if you have a Pop-Tart with a very low thermic effect of food, you're probably burning very few calories and absorbing the majority of what's on that label. And so just switching up your food quality can make a meaningful difference in calories absorbed, which is why some people, if one person's eating 2,000 calories of junk and one person's eating 2,000 calories of well-balanced, whole nutrient-dense meals, you might see a difference in their body composition, in their weight loss trends, like in their results because of that difference, right? But you'll never be able to know how many calories are truly absorbed. Never be able to know. Second example, food sourcing. So if I were a chicken farmer of a small farm, small local pasture raised chickens, very spoiled, lovely chickens, those chickens might be free range. They might be running around. They might have more muscle mass on them because they're running around more. They might have less fat mass on them because they're running around. Versus the chickens that are bred in large, large industrial quantities, millions at a time, sitting in their little crates, not able to move. Those chickens might have more fat in them because they're not able to move as much. However, the label on the chicken that you buy from the grocery store will be the same every single time. USDA chicken, 2.5 grams of fat for 22 grams of protein or something like that, right? And you're going to track it that way regardless of which chicken that it was. And you'll never know what the actual composition of that chicken was. So you're never going to be perfectly accurate, but you can still reliably lose fat without hyperfixating on these details and being miserable. And so I want you guys to get this, that tracking is not a test that you pass or you fail. We want to use it as a tool to gather information consistently of our habits and be able to change over time what we're doing. And it's not a test that you pass or fail. It's a conversation you're having with your body over time. And one messy entry doesn't ruin the conversation, just like saying one thing wrong doesn't ruin your relationship with someone. It's just one sentence, okay? And so here's what I know from working with over 1,300 women on this exact issue. Understanding all of this intellectually is not actually the same as changing your relationship with the data, right? You could listen to this episode and be like, oh, this all makes so much sense. I'm so relieved. I don't have to be perfect. And then open MyFitnessPal tomorrow and still have the same level of dread that you've always had, because the relationship doesn't change from a podcast. It changes from a process. And there's a specific progression that I've built out over the years, specifically working with some clients who are extremely resistant to tracking and building a process around that can then vary in level of pace and intensity for the person, because some people will, adjust quicker than others, where we're rebuilding their relationship with tracking. And it's really not what you think. Like, we don't start with just like MyFitnessPal calorie goal, go for it. We don't start with macros. And we don't even start with like having a calorie goal or a number. We start somewhere completely different, and it changes everything about how the data feels. And it has been revolutionary to rewire your entire relationship with what can collecting data feel like. And so if you want to know what that process actually looks like, I will link below, link to book an audit call in the show notes. It's completely free. You'd book a call with me or one of my team members, and we would figure out just where exactly does your relationship with tracking start right now, and what is it going to actually take to fix it, parts of this process, and how can we start to implement that for you and with you and walk you through the messy in-betweens of the emotional triggering moments, the times where you want to throw in the towel and jump off the ledge, and the moments where you start to really see the wins of, oh, I'm really starting to see this differently. So before we close this episode, I want you to sit with 3 main questions. The first, what have you been making numbers mean about you? Number 2, what past experience wired your relationship with tracking the way that it is? And is that story relevant to your life right now? Or could a different one become true? Not is a different one true, not challenge it right away and just start to believe everything something else. What could become true? And third, what might change if you could look at the data with genuine curiosity instead of dread? Those 3 questions are exactly what I ask my clients on our group call. And those 3 questions are exactly where the work actually starts. So thank you guys so much for listening. Send me your feedback on this episode. I have loved teaching on this topic and can't wait to do more of it. And let me know any other topics you'd like to hear about on this podcast. Send me a message and we'll see you back here for the next one next week.